we are very excited to have with us an expert in how to promote your business or yourself. If you're thinking, I don't have a business, it's also going to be very beneficial for those of you on learning how to promote yourself. So Crayton Webb is actually the owner and CEO of Sunwest Communication. Previous to that, you were the VP for corporate communications for Mary Kay, which I always think that's a very exciting and interesting job, I would imagine. You also have had the opportunity to work in politics. You were the chief of staff for Major Laura Miller, and you started your career in broadcast journalism. So want to kind of know how your path, how you plan your career, if it was a plan or more by accident that you fell into these jobs. But also, before I do that, I know you do a lot of work with nonprofits. You're on their board, helping them, and I'm sure they can benefit from all your great leadership. Because in 2019, you were named by DCO magazine as one of the Dallas 500 most powerful business leaders in Dallas. So we don't just have anybody, but we really have somebody that knows what they're doing. So we love to hear from you on how do we really position ourselves or our businesses, Crayton. So I'll turn it over to you. And thank you for joining us.
Rafaela, thank you for the very kind introduction. It's nice to see you all. I've come to believe that the greatest compliment that you can give someone is to ask their opinion. So I'm flattered that you would ask me. But the number one piece of advice that I would give you based on your kind introduction is never believe your own press, whether it's good or bad. Remember all the lessons your mom taught you about staying humble, because the minute you start believing your own press, good or bad, boy, you're in trouble. So as Rafaela said, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time telling you my story, and I'm most looking forward today to hearing your questions. Anything and everything's on the table, so don't hesitate, and I hope you'll ask tough questions. So how I like to introduce my background, you asked me, Rafaela, how I got here, and was it planned? And the answer is absolutely not. So I started my career as a journalist, and then got into politics. And then when I went to Mary Kay, I was actually originally hired as a lobbyist. So, we all have people in our lives who keep us humble and down to earth. My mother and my wife, as a matter of fact, but my mother especially is one of those. And so she used to say, oh, great, you've been a reporter and you've been in politics, and then you were a lobbyist. Now you just need to be a used car salesman and a game show host, and you'll never get to heaven. So of course, that was very humbling. But finished out my career at Mary Kay. I was there for 12 years. And ended up being the vice president of corporate communications and corporate social responsibility. So really rewarding. In one way, we were the internal public relations firm for all 40 countries where Mary Kay was located. So a couple times a year, I'd get to go to China, to South America at least once a year, Europe once a year. Believe me, that travel gets old. Although I will tell you, I have 4 children. So I have 3 boys who are 12, 10, and 8, and a daughter who's 4. So anytime I'd prepare for a trip to China, especially, people would say like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's such a long way to go. And I'd say, wait, I get 14 hours all to myself on an airplane. I can read, I can sleep, I can watch a movie, I can do whatever I want. Are you kidding me? This is fantastic. So in any case, we were storytellers, and it really gave us a chance to work with communities all across the world. And then on the corporate citizenship side, our job was really to ensure that we were good corporate citizens, that we were giving back, that we were empowering the Mary Kay independent sales force to give back, to be charitable, and to work with nonprofit organizations around the country. And as part of that, we put a stake in the ground and said, we want to be the leader globally in the effort to prevent and end domestic violence. So, but then everything changed. And, I know we've got a lot of entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial type folks on the line today, entrepreneurial thinkers. And frankly, I'm not sure that I really qualify as an entrepreneur because I'm not sure if you have an opportunity to buy a business that's already in existence, if that really qualifies me or not. But I am sure that I have the same stress level And what I have found since I had an opportunity 3.5 years ago to buy SunWest Communications is I have spent a lot of time over the last 3.5 years eating my words. Things that I used to say when I was in the corporate world that now when I'm in business and business ownership and as an entrepreneur, if you will, that I've learned the hard way. Briefly, just for background, SunWest is a public relations and a public affairs firm. So we're storytellers. We do a lot of media relations for our clients. We're pitching media, traditional media. We help them create content and develop thought leadership strategies, do social media. We have a full service creative organization where we do graphic design and video and podcasts. And then we do government relations and government affairs. And then for the folks who are in the nonprofits who are with us today, we do a lot of corporate social responsibility for-profit organizations, helping them, if they're a corporation, start, build, grow their own 501c3 for corporate foundations. And for nonprofits, whether it's feasibility studies or capital campaigns or public relations and storytelling, that's something we really enjoy doing. So part of this is all about our sense of service and our obligation and duty to give back, to leave the world a little bit better than we found it, to leave the proverbial campground cleaner than we found it. So I think that leads to a lot of the passion that we have for contributing. And we all know that society and culture have a lot of issues right now that we're dealing with. And that's not a political issue. That's not a matter of red or blue. That's just black and white. We got problems and a lot of people who need help. And I think it's our obligation as human beings to give back and as I say, leave the world a little better than we found it, if nothing else for our children and for our grandchildren's sake. So I will say the number one thing, the number one set of words that I have eaten, if you will, since I had a chance to buy SunWest. I used to talk to my team at the corporation. We would brainstorm and I would say, come on, guys, what are we going to do? Hope and prayer are not strategies. Well, let me tell you, if you're a business owner, you know that hope and prayer are absolutely business strategies. In fact, they may be the number one strategy. So this is a topic for another day, another time, but I will tell you, I certainly have grown in my own faith since becoming a business owner. That's been very, very important because there's so many things that you aren't in control of. I also remember talking about the public relations agencies that we would hire when I was on the corporate side. And I'm not sure that I was a very good client, to be frank. So I have a better sense now of what being a good client is. But I remember saying to my team, who would come in and they would say, well, the agency said this, or they can't do this. And I would always say, hey, who's the customer? We're the customer. And I think what I've grown to appreciate is that the best partnerships are just that. They're partnerships. And we talk to our clients and potential clients all the time about, listen, if you're looking for a vendor, that's probably not us. We don't want to be a vendor. We want to be a partner. We know you want to run hard and run fast, and we want to run hard and run fast with you. That same philosophy has led me to a third point, which is people will often ask the same question you did, Rafaela, which is how do you do this? How are you growing your business? And this hasn't been a change. I've always believed this, but it has rung true more than ever in my career or not my life. And that is, you are only as good as the people that you surround yourself with. And I like to joke, I have a really good team. I surround myself with people who are smarter than I am. And then I always chuckle that there's probably people in the room going, haha, that I know him. That's probably not all that hard for him to surround himself with people who are smarter than he is. And that's probably true. But when I came to SunWest, the truth is there were 16 of us. There's now about 32. And the team had been here for a really, really long time. And in the world of public relations, that's very unusual. In firms, there's a heavy churn, and also over 2 to 3 years, a lot of the clients turn over. And what I noticed about the team that was here at SunWest is the vast majority of them had spent their entire careers here, 10, 15, 20 years. Now, being cynical, I was like, okay, what does that mean? why are they why have they been here so long? Are they coasting? Are they relaxing? You know, what's going on? But it became apparent very early on that it was an incredible team. And my number one job as a new entrepreneur, frankly, was to not screw it up, right? You don't come in and fix something that's not broken. And you know, one of my favorite sayings, it actually is a Mary Kay Ash saying. I'm not saying I'm good at practicing it. I'm saying it's one of my favorite sayings. She said, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use them proportionately. And so I really tried to be very disciplined at the beginning, probably more disciplined than I usually was or had been, because I'm an idea guy. I've got lots of ideas, and as you can tell, I can't wait to share my ideas. But I really had to be disciplined at first. You'll have to ask the team how successful I was. But the goal was to really listen. People would come down the hall and say, "Well, how would you like us to handle this?" And my first question was, "Well, what do you think?" Because frankly, they've been doing this a lot longer than I had. So especially our senior leadership, I've really learned that it's critical that I treat them like they're partners in this business. And that doesn't mean ownership, but it sure means skin in the game. And people support what they help create. And if they feel like they've got that skin in the game, that's really important. And then I will also say, I knew it was going to be important that we go out and tell our own story, because public relations firms are really good at, you know, theoretically, at helping other people tell their story, amplifying a message. That's what we do, right? We're helping organizations, nonprofits, corporations, individuals put their best foot forward. I'll tell you a brief story. We talk about thought leadership all the time. Everybody wants to be a thought leader right now, right? How do I become a convener of a conversation on social media? How do I get the media to call me? So some of my favorite clients are CEOs who want to be a thought leader, or their staff want them to be thought leaders. So one of my favorites is it works for a real estate, the CEO of a commercial real estate company. And I say there's three kinds of CEOs. There's the one CEO who comes in and we say, well, you know, you need to elevate your stature. You need to be more prolific on social media. Let's talk about a podcast. Let's talk about all the ways that you can be notable and quotable and get the media's attention. And their response is, no. I want to push my people forward. I want to put my people out in front. To which our response is, well, that's great, but there's only one CEO, and that's you. Right? So nobody wants to interview or hear from the senior director of this, that, or the other. You're the CEO. You've got the bully pulpit. You've got the title and position. So if you want your company and organization to benefit from a thought leadership portfolio, it's got to be you. The second kind of CEO comes in and says, no, I don't want to do any of that. I want to stay below the radar. And usually they make that comment about a month after they just made a major announcement about how they're growing. So it's like, well, wait a minute, you just announced you're $100 million company. You're not below the radar. Sorry, you're, I mean, we won't say this, but you're delusional. Like, you are on the radar for good, bad, or the ugly. So let's make sure, let's use the asset of you as the CEO and put your best foot forward, and let's develop a thought leadership portfolio. The third kind of CEO is the one that I'm talking about, who we represent with this real estate development company. And he came in and I just loved it, because he's like, hey, why are all my competitors getting quoted when on all these stories in traditional media? And by the way, why are all our competitors winning all the awards for Dallas Business Journal and DCEO and you name it? So I love that, because even though a critical person could claim that that's not humble, he's honest. Right? He's honest and frank and understands his value, his job, his role as a CEO. And we knew where he stood, right? I mean, if you're in business, or if you report to anybody, even a board, you just want to know where they stand, what they want, what does success look like, what are their objectives, right? So when someone comes in and says, this is what I want to do. So for us, like, okay, we can work with that. We can work with that. We know what your goals are. So bringing us back to SunWest and my story, I knew that we had to tell our story because PR firms are a lot like law firms or accounting firms. There's a billion of them out there. It's almost like a commodity. So how do we make ourselves stand out? And one of my favorite sayings is, if you don't tell your story, if you don't tell your own story, somebody else will do it for you, or worse yet, no one will. Because what's worse, having people talk bad about you or having no one talk about you at all? Now, I'm not talking about from a personal perspective. I'm talking about from a business perspective. And if you're in business, we need people, if you're a nonprofit, doesn't matter what you do, we need people talking about us so that you're top of mind, so that they will do business with you or donate to you, right? All very important pieces. So I think as leaders, we all have to think about, how do we stay humble? How do we raise our head above the radar at the right time, at the appropriate time? How do we as leaders push our people forward and make sure that they have an opportunity to shine, that they don't feel like that they're always in your shadow? But by the same token, how do we create our own narrative for who we are and what we do? And so we decided that we needed to, as a PR agency, do a little bit of our own PR. And you know, some of these things aren't terribly complicated, but one of the ways we did that was our own media, our own social media presence. And one of the ways we decided to build a social media presence really was on LinkedIn. And we decided, I told you I'm a recovering journalist, former television news guy. So we started shooting these little, we called it 2 minutes of advice from SunWest. These short 2 minute, well, you can tell from listening to me, I'm not exactly succinct. So sometimes they'll go a little longer than 2 minutes, if you know what I mean. But it was our way of giving friends of the firm, followers, potential clients, and existing clients a little bit of advice based on our expertise. You know, we weren't giving away the farm. We weren't giving away so much advice that a competitor could steal our ideas, or a client, somebody would say, oh, well, I just got everything I needed from that 2 minutes. I don't need to hire them now. It wasn't that much, but it was enough that it was hopefully adding value to whoever spent the 2 minutes watching it, that it raised our profile as a public relations firm. So even the people who didn't watch at all, or they would just at least see the video or see the post in the scroll, and thereby helping us raise our stature. And then, of course, hopefully in some cases, it really did add value, so that when it was time for someone, or when it becomes time for an organization to say, I need to engage with a PR firm, I need messaging help, I have a crisis communication situation, we have a graphic, we have a brochure, we have a campaign, whatever that was in our wheelhouse, that they would think of us first. So part of this is playing the long game. As you message yourself, as you put yourself out there, as you tell your own story, you know, let's face it, if we engage in traditional marketing, if you write a check for a big marketing or advertising campaign, whether it's billboards or radio or TV, whatever, you expect an immediate return, right? I mean, you got to justify that expense. Public relations, in my opinion, is more about reputation building, right? And it's a long game, not years, but it can be. And I think that's a good case also for being involved in the community. It's good business for my team to be out and about and serving on boards and commissions, to work with nonprofits. First of all, it's the right thing to do. Second of all, employees feel good about working here, I hope, because we support them, whether it's financially or with their time, in their interest in giving back. But third, I think it also there's a business case, because our hope is that whether it's a month from now, a year from now, or 5 years from now, they'll that individual, that team member with SunWest, who they were involved with that nonprofit organization. So I certainly understand the need and the hope and the desire to be a humble leader, to be a servant leader. I think that's incumbent upon all of us. But we have to find ways to tell our story in the right way that feels authentic. I know that's an overused word, but it's really important. If it doesn't feel like it's you or who you are, then it doesn't make sense to do it. So I think balancing between who you are versus pushing your own boundaries in order to expand and be an even better leader and live up to our true and full potential, I think that's incumbent upon all of us to push our own barriers. But you also know, that voice in your ear, that little something on your shoulder tells you when something's just not right or just not appropriate. And so you've got to listen to that. So I would love to answer your questions. I appreciate you listening a little bit about my history and background and my story and what brought me here.
Well, that'll be good. Before we get started on your questions about the company, I did want to follow up with you. You mentioned that you had 4 children. I believe you have 3 boys and a girl.
Yes.
So I have 2 questions. Does the little girl get all your attention? Because they always say that, little girls can get their dads around their finger. So is that the case with you?
Yeah, it's funny. I look over at my wife all the time when my daughter and I are interacting, and my wife just looks at me and she goes, right? So it's funny you say that, Rafaela, because that is exactly what I'm accused of all the time. And the boys will say, "Oh, Dad, we know that Lucy's your favorite." No, of course not. Of course, I mean, I love all my children, but there is something special about a father and a daughter.
They know how to work you. So that's, I just wanted to make sure that you were a typical father.
Yes.
But now, all seriousness, you do have 4 children. You do work, and I know you're very committed to your company, because I'm aware that, I knew SunWest prior to you buying the company.
Yeah.
I know the growth that you've been able to bring to the corporation. So you have to be very committed with a great vision for the growth of the company. But how do you balance all that? How do you balance the family, the children, and the company commitment and time that you have to give it?
Yeah, well, this goes back to the hope and prayer part, right? The truth is I don't know that I do all the time. I can't say that I'm successful at that all the time. I've really come to believe that we've got to be a lot more honest with ourselves. The folks who say you can have it all, you can do it all, I don't know. I'm not sure that's a fair standard to create for ourselves. I think you do have to create boundaries, right? I think you do have to, and I think I struggle with this all the time, perhaps like so many of you might, and that is I say my number one priority is my family, but if I were to mark my time, if I were to go back and look at where I spend my time, I mean, there's no question, Rafaela, that I spend most of my time working. So I think it's really important, that I think about is how do I be present with my children and my wife to make sure that I'm there, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, which means the phone can be very addictive. So how do we create boundaries to put the phone away? How do we manage expectations with our clients? So, I mean, a lot of the client work that I do or that I'm involved with are clients who have crises. I mean, they're in crisis. And so they have retained us because in theory, we're available 24/7. At 4 a.m, if the phone rings, they expect us to take the call. So, sometimes you have to create boundaries, and other times for a period of time, you have to manage expectations even with your family to let them know, okay, right now this is special. And I will tell you, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way, but something that I have listened to a lot. I recently had a friend or an acquaintance tell me, he said, I work all the time. I'm working on the weekends, but I take 2 weeks off every summer. And I'd really like to think that I'm giving my family quality time. And I feel guilty to tell you that I felt very judgmental when I heard them say that, because I do think when it comes to our families, quantity is just as important as quality. Sometimes just in fact, I find, like, I pick my 10-year-old up from soccer on Monday and Wednesday nights, and I find when I try too hard to ask questions or dig stuff out of him, it doesn't work as well. Whereas if we just will sit and be and listen to some music, that it's just a lot more easier. So is that quality time? Well, I don't know, but I'm there. It's present. You're being present. So, and then I think we have to create boundaries with our team also. I think if we're, I try to say, like, listen, if I email you over the weekend, you don't need to respond. wait till Monday. And I try to even say, even in the subject line, for later or for Monday, right? Don't look at this now. Because it's kind of selfish, isn't it? That I wanted to get it off my to-do list and so that I could, while it was top of mind. So you have to have signals, and you have to be clear on what your expectations are. If I text, it's an emergency. If I email, it's not. And I think setting those boundaries is really important. But anyway, I've gone on and on. I think all that to say, you do your best. Your kids do grow up, and they grow up quickly. You want to do a really good job with your clients, but at the end of the day, we're humans also. And I guess so. Let me say one more thing. I think one thing in business that I've learned is that relationships are everything. And relationships not only with your team, but also with your clients. And let me take it a step further. When I was on the other side, there was a friend of mine who was a co-owner of a PR agency. And he used to come to me and pitch all the time. And I would always say to him, why would we ruin a perfectly good friendship by working together? And that was, my way. I didn't want to work with them. Now that I'm on this side, I realize that if I'm working with a friend, if a friend trusts me enough to engage my firm, wow, I feel a lot of pressure to get it right, because I got to look that person in the eye for the rest of my life. So, I think relationships, we don't do a lot of RFPs here, so it's a lot of referral, and you don't get that unless you do a good job, and unless you surround yourself with people who do a good job, and then you create an environment where they feel like their families are important to them too, and they can do that. So, I mean, it all connects together, right? It all comes back together. They're the same principles.
I have a few more other questions, but we're starting to get some questions from our audience. So they want to know, should you promote an organization to solve their problems? Or, so it says, in other words, should we always provide a solution? Or I guess, lead them to a solution versus telling them what the solution will be to their problem?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't mean to be a cop out, but I think it really depends. Let me give you an example. We have a client who we were talking with yesterday who was feeling some pressure to participate in a media opportunity. And they were feeling this pressure from one of their board members. Our client felt in their heart of hearts that they weren't ready and that it wasn't the right thing to do. Now, from our perspective, that board member who our client was feeling pressure from is also a friend of the firm. We know them as well. So, right, we didn't want to tell our client, no, don't participate. So instead, what we did is we said, well, you need to do what you think is right, but let us walk you through what the consequences could be, depending on what path you take. So I think for all of us, whether you do what I do or whatever business you're in, oftentimes your greatest value, your greatest asset is the advice and counsel you can provide. And so sometimes people need to be able to come to the answer on their own, and sometimes you need them to come to the answer on their own. It's better for everybody and it also helps in the dialogue. But based on your advice and counsel, if you can walk them through, well, if you do this, here are the consequences, or potential. If you do this, here are the potential consequences. And then that helps them come to a decision on their own. I don't know if I really answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because I think it's kind of like you help them do that critical thinking. So if they ever have another problem, they now can take it in the same process and say, okay, if I make this decision, this is what's going to happen. If I make this decision, this is what's going to happen. So they're not always dependent on you. At some point, they're going to be able to make those decisions and do that critical thinking to make the decision that they need to. So thank you. But the other question that we have is, when we're looking at that, and you mentioned how important partnerships are partnerships as important for a small business as for a large business?
Well, I think so. Sometimes even more so. And I consider Sunwest a small business, and our partnerships are critical. But I think I define partnerships, as you've heard, pretty broadly. My employees are partners. Good people have choices, right? Good people who are qualified and are good at what they do can leave anytime they want. So I can never have an attitude like you're lucky to be here or like that, because that doesn't work. And especially right now. So they're partners. Our clients are clearly partners. And that's a little more obvious. But then there's other times where we get asked to do things where they want us to lead it because they've got a relationship, they've got rapport, they've got trust, but it might not be in our wheelhouse. I'll give you a great example. Dear friend of mine who I worked at Mary Kay, he joined us from Houston. He was at a Spanish language PR firm, Lopez Negrete. So we were a client. I met him there. One day I had an opening. I said, hey, what would it take to get you to come to Dallas and come to work with me? Well, fast forward, here we are 10 years later. He's out on his own doing PR, and we just had lunch today and are talking about how can we partner together so that SunWest can service so many of our clients who have Spanish language media needs, who have diverse internal organizations, and frankly, we have our own DEI strategy. It's important to me that we have a diverse workforce. But my friend, he doesn't want to work for me. He wants his own thing. So there could be a good partnership there. So anyway, that's long-winded once again, but I think you get the sense. I almost think it's everything.
Yeah, and I like that. I like the fact that you say, your employees are your partners, and the good ones can leave because they have other offers or people are interested, especially nowadays in social media. They get connected on LinkedIn or somewhere, and they look at you and say, I think you're the right person for this job or something like that. So it is very important that people look, I guess, in some cases, that their employees are their partnership, because like you said, and I agree, I kind of smiling because I'm like, gosh, it's almost like you were reading my mind, when you say the good people have options. So those are the people that you need to know how to work with, because you want to retain those people. And so I was thinking, gosh, you think so much. So I like that. But the other thing that I was mentioned, and we talked about it earlier, you cover it during your presentation, is that it's also good to have people that are honest with you. So as a company, if and we get a chance to work with you, so I know. But let's say I was to hire you now, and I would come to you, Crayton, and say, okay, this is what we want to do, and that it's really the wrong thing for us to do. Would you tell us that it's the wrong thing, or would you let me think, well, that's what she's going to do, let her do it? So how, as a corporation or a partner that we start working together, how do you navigate that to be able to tell somebody, I'm going to tell you what you need to hear versus what you want to hear?
Yeah, I love you said that. I will never forget a conversation that I had with early in my career at Mary Kay with our CEO, David Hull, who's still there. And we had enough of a rapport, or maybe I was too arrogant, ignorant, or aloof to know the difference. But he
or
said,
naive, or naive.
or naive. But he said, well, tell me what you think. And I said, well, do you want me to tell you what you need to hear, or do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? And here's what he said, and I think this is it in a nutshell. He said, I want you to tell me what I need to hear, but I need you to tell it to me in a way that I can hear it. Right? Let me say that again. I need you to tell it to me in a way that I can hear it, which means on its face, don't be offensive. Don't insult me. Don't talk to me like I'm stupid or talk down to me, right? I need you to be honest and frank with me. But so I think part of, communication is really goes back to that, being a good listener. In order to share, you have to give counsel and context, right? And in order to have context, you have to really know the person that you're giving advice and counsel to, which means you need to have taken the time to listen to them previously and prior to that moment. Now, I mean, if you're calling me and it's the first time we've ever interacted, obviously that's a different dynamic. I haven't had a chance to do that. But a good communicator and a good listener will have listened for the cues, will have read between the lines. Which is funny. It kind of brings me to, it's fantastic that we can do this by Zoom, and it's a whole new world, right? But nothing. Have you ever noticed that on Zoom calls, people interrupt each other and it's more awkward than if you're in a room? Well, right. I mean, that's just, there's something about reading the room, reading facial expressions, hearing, you can hear when someone's about to take a breath and say something so you don't, as opposed to on Zoom or a call, it's a lot harder to do that. So all that to say, yeah, it's critical. Now, there are people who will tell you they want you to tell them what they need to hear, but they don't really want to hear it. And then they argue with you. And that doesn't mean, one of my favorite sayings that one of my mentors taught me was disagree without being disagreeable, right? So, there are certain things in our business we say, transition things like, well, you could do that. But would you like me to share what could happen if you do? And then, they open the door or they don't.
It's really true. And I will share with you because, we're fortunate enough to work with your company. And a lot of the times when we're trying something new, we work with one of your staff, Laura Duggar. And so I often tell her, Lauren, we're going to try this. I need you to be part of it. I need you to listen to it. And then I need you to give me feedback. And once she knows that I want real feedback, don't tell me, what you think I want to hear. She's brutally honest. But she goes on and telling me why. So I think that's also important. She tells me why. And I will tell you an example. When we first did this webinars, when we first started, I said, Lauren, join the webinar and see what you think. And we were terrible. We had terrible technical difficulties on the first one. And so she told me, Rafaela, this and this and this. And then I thought, right, you're right. But we need to hear that, because if we have people that just tell you, oh, everything worked fine and, it was okay, you had a little problems, but it was no big deal, you're not going to know that, hey, we need to get our act together. I need to do this, because if not, we're not going to be successful. So I appreciate that. And it's a little bit unfair because we've had a relationship for a long time. So I think she's able to tell me whatever she needs to tell me, and I'm able to listen to it. But I think it's important, and I know your company does. You know how soon and how fast you can tell people what they need to hear. So thank you for that, and I appreciate her all the time, because I know she's one person that can tell me that. I'll read a comment that we had as we're talking, and one person has said, awesome presentation, great insight. So thank you for that, for sharing that with us. And then the other person is saying, sounds like you call on a higher power to make many of personal needs in businesses successful for you and your clients. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah. And I'll take that as kind of a question about faith. I hope it's okay to talk a little bit about that. I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. I always say I'm Episcopalian, so we saying Jesus out loud makes us uncomfortable because we're so conservative in the way we talk. But yeah, I think absolutely that's true. And I think, like a lot of us, the whole notion of accepting, not just in words, but in our actions, that we're not in control, and that we're called upon to hand over control. And that has been the muscle, for lack of a better phrase, I've really been trying to exercise in my faith, that you have to let it go, you have to turn it over, and you have to have faith that you've always been caught before, that everything's okay and going to be okay, that you were brought here. I mean, I say this to myself all the time, you were brought here for a reason, and all things that happen that way are for good. And then, never forget, again, these are things, I'm not saying I'm perfect at any of these things. I'm just saying these are mantras that go through my mind all the time. You, especially in the middle of the day when you're caught up in the firestorm of busyness. I write, my wife gives me a bad time because I'm a constant list maker. I'm always making lists. I call them my shaving notes. I shave in the morning and I write all these lists down. but I probably have about 6 or 7 different pieces of paper that say, don't forget, why are you here? And it's not because I have the answer. It's because I'm reminding myself to answer to ask the question. And that so often I spend so much time, I don't know necessarily why I'm here, but I know I spend a lot of time doing things that aren't why I'm here. So it's meant to pull me back on track. And it's also meant to remind me that part of my biggest, or one of the biggest parts of my job is to take time um, to cultivate those relationships, to make sure that people feel whole and appreciated and thanked. So yes, I'm a really big work in progress, as again my wife will tell you. And any progress I do make is not my own to take credit for.
So that's good. We have another comment from someone that says, great advice to tell someone what they need to hear, but tell it in a way that they can hear it. That's actually really great. I have, and if she's listening, she's going to get upset. I have a daughter, and I tell people she keeps me very humble, because when I ask her for advice, she'll say, no offense, mom. And I go, okay, here it comes.
Here we go. I'm gonna be offended.
It gets me ready for it. But so yes, it's good to learn a way on how to tell people what they need to hear. So that way they're more receptive to the message that you're giving to them. So that's really great. The other thing that I was going to ask you is, you came from an area where you were hiring companies like what you're running now. So it's really good for you to be able to know what is it that they want, what is it that their ultimate goal, why they're hiring you. So when you're looking at an ROI that we always say, return on investment, is it again important for smaller companies to be thinking about that? I know big companies have the term, they talk about that all the time, but is it as critical for a small company to be thinking about that? And then I'll go even further. How does a person take that into their own personal by ROI to the company or to whatever endeavor they're pursuing?
Yeah. Well, there's no question, we all have a boss, whether it's a board or a client or our actual supervisor, right? So there's no question that we have to report back on what we do. I will say, in reference to your first question, yes, having been on your side for more years, I used to say, and frankly, I still do, I don't like PR firms, right? I really don't. I didn't like them when I was a reporter. I always felt like they were trying to use me. When I was in the mayor's office, I always felt like they were trying to use her. And then when I went to Mary Kay and had a chance to run corporate communications, frankly, I fired them all and I brought everything in house because I felt like it was the same thing. It was a lot of over-promising and under-delivering. You would have the most senior people like Lauren Duggar, you mentioned, or me come in the room for the whiz-bang pitch presentation. Woo, fancy. You sign on the dotted line for what feels like an ungodly monthly retainer, and then you never see them again. And you're no, don't get me wrong, you're handed off to a really smart, really capable junior person who can write news releases and tweets like nobody's business. But I always say, if what you need are news releases and tweets, if you already have the strategy, if you're already the expert and you just need arms and legs to do the work, hire a freelancer, right? But the true, it's kind of like when you hire an attorney, you're not guaranteed success. No attorney worth their salt is ever going to say, nor should they, if you hire me, I guarantee you a win in the courtroom. I mean, nobody's going to ever say that. Neither should a PR person say, if you hire us, we guarantee you're going to get in the morning news or the Wall Street Journal or ABC, whatever. I mean, no one should say that. But what you do is you hire the organization that best sets you up for success for the goals that you have. And they're also going to manage your expectations if they're smart up front about what they can do and what they can't do. Because again, if it's going to be a long-term partnership, you've got to have honesty and transparency from the very beginning. So to your question about deliverables, it all depends on what's important to you. If your stakeholders want to see clicks, they want to see impressions, they want to see ad value and media placements, got it. We know what your goals are and we can work against that. And your question to an agency like ours is, How are you going to help us achieve these goals? One of my favorite stories, again, sorry to bore you with a Mary Kay story, but I told you we wanted to be the national leader during my time in the effort to end and prevent domestic violence. So I got my team all about, people support what they create. They got all excited. Yes, we're on board. And then the next day, two of my leaders, one of which I already told you about today, who I had lunch with, two of my leaders came in and the next day and they said, Crayton, how will we know? I said, what are you talking about? They said, you said we're going to be the national leader. How will we know we're the national leader? I'm like, oh, yeah. Well, and like any good leader, what did I say? You tell me. how will we know? So no, what we did is we brainstormed and we came up with this notion, and this is the advice. There are metrics, but there are also markers. So we decided that when the Wall Street Journal calls, when Harvard calls, and when the White House calls, and they want to know our position, it has nothing to do with cosmetics, but they want to know our position on ending domestic violence, those will be markers that we're on our way. So that's a great way sometimes, especially as it relates to PR and especially storytelling. How do I measure? Because if you're in an organization where there are salespeople, or if you're in a nonprofit organization where there are development and fundraising people, there's no way that the salespeople and the development people are going to give the PR people credit for their sale or their check that they raised, right? So, but of course, it has to be a partnership, but it's that great storytelling that helps you do both sell and raise money. And ultimately, of course, for a lot of our clients, more business or raising more money is the ultimate ROI. And we just have to show how our efforts are helping connect the dots and do that.
So another question that I have for you, as a corporation, should you have some people in your corporation that become skilled at talking to the media, knowing what to say or where to say it, or is the company expected to have everyone know how to do that?
No, no, that's a great question, and it's a simple answer. It's always good to just have a few selected individuals, and obviously, depending on how big you are, if you're in all 50 states, it may require that you have spokespeople at a regional level, maybe even a state level. It just depends. But in most cases, you really want a clear funnel for media requests to come through. And nowadays, what is media? It's different. There are what I call capital J journalists, right? Who even nowadays, some of the rules of engagement have changed. I can't tell you how many clients we've had who have gotten a phone call from a traditional media outlet that in the past I would have called a capital J media outlet, saying, "Hey, we're working on a story. We would like for you to comment." And the same time that the voicemail came in is the exact same time that the story posted online and said, "We've put a call into company XYZ and have yet to hear back." I can't stand that. But the rules of engagement have changed completely, even for traditional media. And of course, now there are influencers and bloggers and even, what some might call trolls, people who've created their own following. And they don't have to follow the rules of engagement. But all that to say, yes, it's really important to have a select few. They should be media trained. They should know how to work with media. And the last thing, I'll say about that is, and I really learned this when I was in the mayor's office because I was handling media relations for the mayor. If you look down and you see your phone, mobile or hardline, doesn't matter, and you see a reporter's name come up, I recommend letting it go to voicemail. Listen to the voicemail, process the question, and then call them back. And it may be 2 minutes. But it is so much better to give yourself that 2 minutes or 20 in order to process and think through what you're going to say or what are you not going to say. Because oftentimes it is, you know what, I don't know the answer to your question. What's your deadline? Who else have you talked to? What's the impetus of the story? Let me get right back to you.
That again, that's great advice. But I would also say, you mentioned earlier about the fact that sometimes you get the email at the same time that you see the news break. I think even in that case, you also, before you respond to the email or you return that call, you need to give yourself a few minutes, because I would imagine you're going to be a little bit upset to see that both things happen at the same time, and they're just kind of trying to pass the buck in.
Well, that's right. And I think it's really important, in addition to the question about spokespeople, it's really important that organizations, for profit, nonprofit, doesn't matter how big or small you are, that you have a crisis communications plan. And this also goes back to people telling you what you need to hear versus what you want to hear. Having someone tell you where your soft spots are, there's a lot of people right now who want to talk about DEI, and they want to talk about the progress that they're making, but don't go promote even to your internal audiences. Don't go tell even your employees, let alone media, what great work you're doing in DEI if you aren't walking the talk, right? Maybe your C-suite or your board is not diverse. Okay, you just put a stake in the ground, say, we're going to work on this, we're going to do better, and this is what it's going to look like. That's probably not the time to go out and wave the flag and say, look at what we're doing, look what we're doing, look at how great we are, because you still have got soft spots, right? You're not shored up. So knowing what your soft spots are, creating a crisis plan, and even creating template statements, 2, 3, no more than 4 sentences about how you would respond, so that when the media does call, you're not caught flat-footed.
Yeah, I would think so. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, wow, I know in the past of corporations that a bad incident has happened and has hired you to kind of to teach them how to respond to the media. And I'm thinking, the weather that we had last week, and how many companies can use you all or your services right now, because they need to know how to respond to the media, with so many of us getting upset over the matter. But
well, the tendency, just briefly, the tendency in crisis is to bury our head in the sand, right? And say, okay, well, it'll just go away. Well, look, if a reporter calls and you don't answer, it's not like they're going to go cover the Muffin Festival instead, right? They're going to do the story with you or without you. So being prepared, and sometimes, and last week is a great example, I think the organizations that fared better last week from a reputation perspective didn't hunker down. In fact, quite the opposite. They went great guns. They were very available. And even if it went so far to say, we don't know right now, but here's what we do know. And then they're available, and that creates the benefit of the doubt. So even if we're cold, we have no water, we're angry, we're frustrated, the rolling blackout has been hours, if not days. But if at least we feel like somebody is communicating with us and being honest, even if we don't like what they're saying, we're more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt.
And I have another question for you. Earlier, also, you mentioned that, so many times, or in some cases, you when you're in a meeting, you tell your people there's smarter people in the room than you are. And I think sometimes it's hard for people to think of that, or to own that. Sometimes we don't want to realize that they are smarter people than we are. We want to think we're the smarter person in the room. But why is it important for us to really understand that, and how does that help us grow?
Well, I think it goes back to a couple of things. One, again, people support what they create. So if folks feel like that their voice, their opinion is valued and of interest, then they've got skin in the game. Sometimes, and this also goes back to keep good people having choices. Sometimes it's not just about the money or the hours, the pressure. It's just about feeling valued, that their opinion, that their insight is needed and wanted and asked for. Second, I just can't imagine, and again, I'm not saying I always practice this well. I often get excited in a room brainstorming. But why would a good leader not want the benefit of the expertise and opinions of the people she or he have surrounded themselves around the room? I mean, aren't you taking a bigger reputational risk if, as the leader, you're the first one to speak without having had the benefit of all that expertise that you went to the trouble and expense of hiring? I mean, I don't. I don't want to be first out. I want to hear what everybody has to say before I make a final decision.
Thank you for that. And we're coming close to the end of our time. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to share any advice that you want to share with our participants. But I also wanted to kind of maybe address for us, I know you're a go-getter. I happen to know a little bit about your company. Like I said, I worked with them before you were the CEO, and I know the growth that the company has under your leadership. But how do you do that and stay humble? Because I think that's what's important, and that's what makes great leaders for people that you want to work for, because they have that balance. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that from you, and then share with us your last advice for all of our participants. And again, Crayton, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. You again, what it means a lot. So thank you for your great questions and for the time today. One of my mentors said, never sacrifice integrity for growth. Integrity means a lot of things. I think it means truth and honesty. It means, going back to our conversations about higher power, that you're here for a reason. And even if you're not a person of faith, we're all put here to make a difference in the world and to give back. We've got a reason for being here that's bigger than just ourselves, our own wealth, or our own success. So I think we've got to remember that. And, I guess what it comes down to, Rafaela, is anybody who asks you, what is your management style? And if they answer, I think they're missing a key component. They're missing a key question, because the first thing that should come out of their mouth is, who am I managing? Who am I leading? And have you ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages? Right? Well, that's really about relationships, but people at work have their love language also. What's their juice? Is it title? Is it money? Is it being listened to? Is it, everybody? So I think you got to figure out what people's juices are. I also think, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, and I'm watching our time, so don't worry. When I was a kid, I wasn't very good at math. I'm good enough. But I had so many teachers say, you got to spend more time on math, got to spend more time on math. But I was good at social studies and history and English. And I think the right advice is, you're really good at social studies, English, and history. Focus there. On math, go get your B. Play to your strengths. So I think you can't be afraid to say, I'm trying to fit a square peg into a round hole with this person. I keep trying to force them to do something they're not. And instead, I've got to, let's play to let's find what fits for them. But here's the last part. And that is, I like to run hard and I like to run fast, and I like people to run hard and fast with me. And I've learned the hard way to follow your instincts. When you're interviewing people and being interviewed, it's kind of like getting married after 3 dates, right? I mean, so referral is important, but follow your instincts. If a job doesn't feel right, or if a candidate doesn't feel right, it's probably not. And it would be better to pass than try to fit a square peg into a round hole. Here's my last piece of advice you asked about, and that is, you're never too old to have a mentor. Quarterbacks have a coach, pitchers have a coach. I had an opportunity to have a coach, and at first I was like, what's wrong? What am I doing wrong? Why do I need a coach? And then I realized this is a gift. And so we all have access, if we go out and look for them, to a coach for free, who cares about us enough to tell us what we need to hear, not what we want to hear, but in a way that we need to hear it. So always have a mentor. And with that, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again so much for being with us. Thank you for the great advice and insight for all of our participants.